Welcome, David. This is David Holroyd, Director of Technology for Global Radio. Oh, sorry, for Global, should I say, not just radio. Many of you probably know that Global is one of the the biggest commercial radio group in the UK, with some great brands as Classic, Heart, and Smooth Radio, and I'm missing one more, and Classic FM. And what we're here to talk about in the next 10 minutes really is how we can support radio services in the car with providing really good metadata. We all recognise the big challenges coming to the car dashboard, and I think we see that dashboard as being really sort of the traditional place for radio over the last few years, but it's changing with the tech giants coming in and also the big music services in particular, like the Spotifys, etc. So I think, David, really it's to ask you, what are you doing in Global to support your radio stations in terms of providing what type of metadata?
Well, there's a range of metadata that we provide. I mean, most obviously, the name of the radio station, the service label as it's called. We provide information about the track and artist that's playing in the DLS. But we also provide the logos, which is perhaps one of the lesser known pieces of metadata that we provide and very important, we think, in the car. We do this in a number of ways, both using radio DNS for IP-connected vehicles, and we broadcast it over the air on DAB on 7 multiplexes now in the UK. We've been, since 2018, been broadcasting our logos in packet data channels. And there are other various bits of metadata that broadcasters can and do broadcast in the UK, and perhaps if we have time at the end we can talk about those as well.
That'd be great, thank you. And I think you've got some images you're going to show us as well, and this I think is really going to explain to us what works and maybe what doesn't work so well. So if you can maybe talk through. Sure.
So I mean, first of all, it's worth saying that we invest a huge amount of money in our brands. You heard earlier that the number of radio stations is booming, pun intended, because of the capability on DAB and DAB+ to squeeze more radio stations into the spectrum. That means it's even more difficult than ever to make your station jump out. So we invest a huge amount in both audio and visual branding for our radio stations to make them stations that can be located and stations that our listeners associate with. So you can see, and you'll have probably seen it on your way here today, perhaps at the airport or on the underground, on the Elizabeth line, on a roadside billboard or on the side of a bus, you'll have probably seen some of our radio stations advertised. And as well as that, we put a lot of effort into visualization in Global Player, which is our app, which has got 6 million regular users. And there's also, as well as that, we've got extensions to our brands, non-radio extensions, be it Classic FM dating or Heart Bingo. So our logos are everywhere, and people recognise them, and we would like people to be able to use them to easily locate our radio stations in the dashboard. You asked about a couple of perhaps examples that weren't so successful, and there's a couple in that slideshow that's rotating there. In terms of what's gone wrong, one of them you'll notice, for those who know the UK radio industry and its history, there's a new car, let's come around in just a second, a new car, it's only a year old, and it's got a logo that's at least 10 years out of date for a radio station that was rebranded over 10 years ago, and yet the logo persists in the car. There it is there. It's the Wyvern FM logo. That radio station's long since gone. And you can also see that there are a number of radio stations listed there that don't have a logo at all. And that's because a radio station like Boom, which has only been on air for 18 months, the logo probably wasn't in existence when the car was manufactured. So that's the first problem. And then the other one is, we just heard in the last video there that the screens are getting bigger and bigger in the vehicles, and yet sometimes they're taking the smallest resolution image and sort of expanding it to fill the entire screen, and obviously that looks terrible. So there are a number of things that broadcasters can do about those, and with the rest of the industry.
But in terms of, so with the car maker, obviously they know that the broadcasters or some broadcasters are providing logos in particular, and obviously extra information as well. But where do they go to get that information? Do they come to you directly? And if they are doing that, why are they then having some of the wrong logos?
So they don't need to come to have a one-to-one conversation with us directly. Broadcasters like us and the BBC are already making these logos available publicly. So the first thing I'd say is, make sure you're using an authentic copy of the logos and getting those updated regularly. There's no need to guess the logos. There's no need to pay someone else to maintain a database of logos for you because we're publishing them. As I mentioned, we're broadcasting them on DAB in the UK on 7 commercial multiplexes, plus they're broadcast on the BBC National Multiplex. As well as that, if the vehicle's IP connected or the receiver is IP connected, you can use the radio DNS standard to pull the logos, and those are always up to date. Anytime we make a change to our logos, that's the first place we update them. So it's really easy. There's an Etsy spec that explains how to do it. If you want to look it up, it's TS 102818.
Remember that, everyone.
And in fact, it's very easy to implement because there's open source software that's been written. It's in the Open Digital Radio GitHub repository. There's software in there that will get the logos out of the DAB stream for you. So, I mean, the only thing I would please beg of manufacturers is don't embed hard-coded logos into the receiver because they will very quickly be out of date. New stations will be launched, so there'll be logos missing or wrong, and that's not good for the user experience.
And I'm assuming you want the consistency, so what your users see on the global app and to what they'll actually see then when listening to your stations in the car. So it's exactly the same logos that are going to be displayed and everything as well.
That's right. It helps listener recall because as I say, we invest so much money in putting these logos out places that we expect people to be able to see exactly the same thing in the car, and then they'll be able to, as they're scanning down hundreds of radio stations potentially, they'll be able to find the one they're looking for. And
just in terms of just DAB in particular, there's always lots of discussions around lots of events like this on, well, it's fine to provide logos using DAB, but there isn't enough capacity. So how do you work that out in terms of your capacity on your local muxes in particular? Yeah,
I mean, it is difficult, especially, and some of the UK muxes are absolutely chock-a-block full. So where we can get capacity for a packet data channel, we will put logos in there, which is what we've done, and we'll hope to try and find some more capacity working with multiplex operators and others. And then where we can't, as I mentioned, if you've got an IP-connected vehicle, as increasingly they are, then there's a route to get the logos that way.
And is your hope that over time, especially with a sort of hybrid radio solution in particular, that actually your logos will be the first thing that they will see on the dashboard, and it won't be, FM frequencies or anything like that, so people will actually be able to, see that logo, identify very, very quickly.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the best. I mean, obviously, if you haven't got the logos and you've just got an alphabetical list of stations, that's fine. But I think logos provide a better experience to locate stations quickly, especially if you're driving and you're just glancing down at the screen. And in terms of again, we know there's some broadcasters who provide lots of good logos and other metadata as well. There are some that don't do it. And there are some car makers, as you say, will take the data in the right way, and some will actually embed it into their dashboard, into their directories themselves. How can we make sure, as an industry, we can actually provide the right metadata to those car makers, and they actually take it from us as well? I know we all talk about collaboration, but what does that really mean? Well, it means we need to work from the broadcasters, the multiplex operators, the transmission providers, through to the manufacturers of receivers and vehicles, making sure we're all understanding the same specification and implementing it in the same way. There's a number of things available to help with that, as I mentioned, including some open source tools. There's the ETI recordings available from WorldDAB to see how we're doing this. And as I mentioned, we've been doing it now for 5 years over the air. So this can be tested out. If receiver manufacturers want to talk to us about how we're doing it or test it out, that's possible. But we all need to work together to make it a good experience. It has previously been a bit chicken and egg, where receiver manufacturers are waiting to see what broadcasters will do, broadcasters are waiting to see what receiver manufacturers will do. So by communicating, collaborating, hopefully we can make sure that we provide a really great experience. I think it's always quite hard, isn't it, to get all the car makers actually in one room with broadcasters, because they don't always like sharing their same information, because obviously there is competition there as well. So I think that's one of the trickiest things we've all had to try and overcome. Yep. And we end up, I think, having lots and lots of individual meetings, which actually isn't the right way of always doing it. No, and it's great to have consistency, open standards that we can share. There's nothing particularly commercially sensitive here. This is just us all trying to get the logos looking right in the car and a great user experience. I don't think there's anything really too sensitive there. And that's why we try to make as much of it open standard, open source as we can. I mean, one of the obviously things that always comes up again from the car makers is it's great to have all these images if you can provide them, but there's a safety concern, because as you say, that screen is getting bigger and bigger and bigger,
You don't want to, obviously, the driver to take their eyes off the road at all. So how do you sort of see, how can you look into the future? What sort of metadata would you want to provide that you're not doing already to sort of enrich that experience? Because as we can see from the music services, the really rich metadata that they're providing. And radio can look a little bit old-fashioned if we're not careful, and we need to bring it up to what they're all doing. So what other metadata do you think we could do?
Well, as you say, we don't want to make it too busy and too distracting, but realistically there's program information, schedule information, which is easily available. In fact, we already make that available through a radio DNS standard as well. So there's small amounts of information that wouldn't be too distracting, but would add value and a better user experience to radio listeners, both in car and anywhere else for that matter. So I think probably, in addition to the now playing track and artist information that we've already talked about, there's program schedule information, which is probably the other most valuable bit. There are other options as well. Obviously, there's slideshow possibility. Perhaps that in the car maybe is less applicable because of the distraction element. But for us, I think, you know, once we've cracked logos, we'd probably move on to program information.
I mean, it should be quite simple, shouldn't it, really?
Yeah, it should. And so a lot of the tools are out there for people to help themselves and have a crack at it. So yeah, on the face of it, it's not difficult, but as we found in practice, there's more to it than that.
Well, I think if anyone wants to actually come and talk to David about Global's offer, please do so, because it is really important that we do get this right. So we do have a real worry that, you know, radio will look like old-fashioned linear radio if we're not careful. We do have to sort of fill that space, fill it with nice images in particular. I mean, one of the things we've obviously looked at is, you know, could we do more in terms of sort of, you know, you've got program images, you've got episode images, you've got a whole range. I mean, I know, I think DTS are able to provide lyrics now.
Yeah,
it's just never ending.
No, there's loads of possibility. I think, you know, and if we are going to do more, then the key things are making sure we're all agreed on the standards we're going to do it on, because as we've seen with the logos, even something relatively simple is actually quite hard in practice. The more permutations that you create, the more opportunities for displaying things in different ways, it's going to get more and more complicated. So yeah, key that everyone communicates and talks about our plans, talks about what's coming down the track and how we're going to do it in a standard and open way.
Okay. So I think, again, the message is really collaborate as much as we can and try and find a way of actually bringing the car makers into the discussions with us a bit more.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.